All right. Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for being here for this very, very important press announcement announcing a legislative package that will be introduced today by the Senate Republican Conference in today's session. This is a legislative package which came out of a recent push from the Sheriff's Association of New York State, and it is the result of about 1.5 to 2 years of Democratic policies and laws that have been passed through one-party control, whose sole aim seems to be to undermine our men and women that wear the uniform, that protect our communities. And you can see from this image here, I don't think anything highlights the result of those policies more than that image. When you release 90% of folks who are charged with crimes, including some violent crimes, when you advocate disobedience, when you demonize law enforcement, when you talk about abolishing police departments, cutting their budgets by half. We have a new member of the New York State Senate, soon to be, who won a primary in the city, who wants to cut the city police department by $3 billion. Not $1 billion, $3 billion. Half the budget, gone. That's police officers in New York City, gone. Despite the complete increase in violent crimes, in shootings, in deaths. All things predicted by my colleagues behind me here today. We will be introducing this legislation, and we will be seeing what the Democrats in the state Senate do. Are they going to continue to put the rights of criminals ahead of the rights of law-abiding New Yorkers? Are they going to continue to advocate for the complete disintegration of public safety in our largest cities? And in many situations, the people who are victims of these crimes, the communities that are victims of these crimes, are minority communities, communities with Black Americans, Black New Yorkers, brown New Yorkers of all backgrounds. The people that they supposedly want to protect, those are the communities that are racked by gang violence, drug violence. Those are the communities that will be most impacted when there's less police officers, when the anti-crime units are gone. So, despite the narrative, let's look at the results. The results has been an increase in violent crime here in this state, and this is exactly what the Republican Conference for the last 2 years has said would happen, and now it's happening. And so today we have a package of bills that is going to try to attempt to remedy that. It'll make some of the folks behind me from law enforcement, it'll make them safer, which we should always try to do, but it will also make our communities safer. Because if they're safer, they're able to protect our communities and do what we expect them to do, which is to protect and serve the people of this state who we are elected by. So I do want to recognize my colleagues who are here, Senator Daphne Jordan, Senator Gallivan, Senator Robach, Senator Akshar, I think I saw Senator Tedisco, Senator Helming, Senator O'Mara, Senator Patty Ritchie is here as well, and Senator George Borrello. And Senator Sue Serino is here. As a complete side note, I'm thrilled to see Senator Sue Serino. She had her treatment this morning, and she is here ready to do the work of the people, not remotely, but here in the Capitol. So it's great to see her here today. With that, I will allow my colleague, Senator Jordan, to introduce to our members of law enforcement. Senator Jordan represents Saratoga and the surrounding area here in the Capital Region. She is a great defender and proponent for the men and women who wear the uniform. She's been a strong advocate on this issue. She will introduce the folks who we hear from law enforcement today. And without further ado, she will also talk about the package as a whole. So without further ado, my colleague, Senator Daphne Jordan.
I do have to take my mask off when I speak. I have asthma, and it's hard enough when I'm not speaking. Thank you, Leader Ort, and thank you for your strong leadership on this critical issue. Good afternoon. I am State Senator Daphne Jordan, representing the 43rd Senatorial District, which includes all of Columbia County and parts of Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Washington counties. I'm proud to be joined today by members of law enforcement from my respective counties and communities. With us today, and you can just give a little wave as I say your name, we have Captain John DeRocha with the Columbia County Sheriff's Office. Saratoga County Undersheriff Richard Castle. Captain Jeffrey Brown with the Saratoga County Sheriff's Office. Rensselaer County Sheriff's Deputy Kyle Bergalt. And Saratoga Springs Police Chief Shane Crooks. Thank you all so much for being here. We're proud and honored to stand beside these outstanding members of law enforcement who've dedicated their lives to protecting and serving and to making a positive difference for their communities. Our police, our sheriffs, the individuals standing with us here are the finest, most dedicated, honorable, professional, and courageous people you'll ever meet. They work in some of the most difficult, demanding, and yes, dangerous conditions imaginable. In a moment, we'll hear from Saratoga County Undersheriff Richard Castle. He'll speak to their experiences as a member of law enforcement, why strong public support for the police is more important than ever, and about the New York State Sheriff's Association's new legislative package that we will be advancing later today during Senate session. We utilized the great work already done by the Sheriff's Association and adopted their smart, forward-thinking legislative package that they unveiled last week. The Sheriff Association's common sense proposal called for protections of and support for law enforcement personnel. Our Protect Those Who Protect Us package, which emanates from and is supported by the Sheriff's Association, would deter violence against law enforcement by increasing penalties on existing crimes and creating new categories of crimes because of new types of attacks. Our package includes increasing the penalty for resisting arrest, establishing the crime of failure to retreat, increasing assault on a police officer by 1 degree for the current crimes pertaining to assault upon a police officer, and make all of them crimes for which a judge could require the posting of bail. I'm proud to support and sponsor that important bill. Creating a Class D felony of aggravated harassment of a police or peace officer. Making any crime committed against a police officer because of his or her status as a police officer a hate crime. Establishing the crime of aggravated offering of a false accusation against a police officer. Establishing the crime of doxing a police officer. Creating the crime of stalking a police officer or peace officer. Establishing a dangerous employment benefit for law enforcement officers. Making Police Memorial Day on May 15th a state holiday in honor of more than 1,500 police officers who have died in the line of duty in New York. These measures are nonpartisan, smart solutions, and the message they send is unambiguous and strong. Our message? The men and women of our Senate Republican Conference and millions of law-abiding New Yorkers stand with law enforcement. We realize that they need protection too, and we'll always have their backs. We've seen shocking reports of how New York City shootings tripled in early July when compared to 2019 numbers. We've witnessed recent chilling attack in New York City as the NYPD's highest-ranking officer, Chief Terrence Monahan, and other officers were brutally beaten as they protected a pro-police unity rally with clergy members crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. And because of the bad policy that our laws now allow for, the suspect who struck Chief Monahan was released without bail. We've watched the sheer insanity of some New York City elected officials defunding the NYPD and ongoing radical calls to defund the police in other cities and communities. And we've seen our best and bravest endure acts of violence, threats, and attempted intimidation. Police officers have been punched, kicked, shot, stabbed, hit with bottles, bricks, and brass knuckles. They've had rocks, Molotov cocktails, and every disgusting insult imaginable hurled at them. Each time, the blue line has stood strong. Now's the time for state government to stand with and speak up on behalf of the courageous men and women of law enforcement. The Senate Democrats should follow our lead, support these important measures, and make passage of this comprehensive legislative package a reality. And right now, I'd like to ask Saratoga County Under Sheriff Rich Castle to share his thoughts.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the Senator said, I'm Rick Castle. I'm the Undersheriff of Saratoga County. On behalf of myself and Saratoga County Sheriff Michael Zerlo, I would like to thank Leader Ort for the opportunity to speak here today. Thank you, sir. I would also like to thank our Saratoga County Senators, Senator Daphne Jordan and Senator Jim Tedesco, and all of their colleagues for their support and effort to pass these vital pieces of legislation. This is a time for all of us to look at ourselves and see how we as law enforcement and we as a society can do better. Last week, the New York State Sheriff's Association President, Sheriff Jeff Murphy of Washington County, proposed a slate of new legislation aimed at enhancing protections for police officers that will also enhance the safety of our members, will also enhance the safety of the members of our communities during law enforcement encounters, as well as recognize the vital and dangerous work done by law enforcement officers across New York State every day. Joining us here today are also many other legislators willing to stand with law enforcement to bring these proposals to the floor. I think we can all agree that law enforcement officers have an important job to do in our society. The discussion currently is the extent to which law enforcement should be involved in certain types of situations beyond the simple protection of life and property. We as law enforcement are not against some of the new legislation and current proposed changes, but many are severely detrimental to the performance of our duties and were drafted without any input from law enforcement whatsoever. Naturally, we are concerned for the safety of our law enforcement officers and the performance of their duties. The job is and has always been dangerous, but has become more so due to those who seek to interfere, attack, or resist the arrest of themselves or another person. Several of the pieces of legislation being proposed here today seek to dissuade people from taking such actions. The public is always free to peacefully protest and to observe police officer encounters and even record them, but these actions should never interfere with the performance of the officer's duties or place the officer or other members of the community in danger. Much of what is being proposed here today is not new, but enhanced in an effort to address laws that are not currently working as originally designed or that do not adequately recognize that an attack on law enforcement officers simply due to their job is not just an attack on that individual, most of whom have never done anything wrong, but an attack on the same institution that many wish to work with constructively to effect change. I had the honor of participating in the President's 21st Century Policing Task Force at the White House in 2016. While I did not completely agree with the outcome, I respect the process that gave rise to it. I welcome the opportunity to hear the many different perspectives on policing from across the country, including from representatives of law enforcement, government, and community groups. We can accomplish the same here in New York if the governor were to bring everyone to the table in an open forum and not just involve hand-selected individuals and groups. Discussions about reimagining law enforcement will never be successful without all stakeholders, including law enforcement representatives, having equal status at the table. I encourage all legislators to contact your local police chiefs and county sheriffs, as you have your community leaders and activists, to begin open discussions with the intent to solve the problems facing our communities, in place of divisive rhetoric, which accomplishes nothing but to further divide us. Finally, to Governor Cuomo, we are anxiously awaiting your invitation to the second floor to begin constructive discussions directly with you and the Democratic leadership of the Assembly and the Senate so that together we can work to address public safety concerns in our communities. Only together can we make New York State a safe place to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you.
Well done, well done.
Thank you very much, Undersheriff. His words mean a lot because they come from the heart and they come from the knowledge of him being a sheriff. And now I'd like to introduce Senator Patrick Gallivan, who also has a lot of insight on these topics.
Thank you all for being here, and a special thank you to those representing the State Sheriff's Association that are here today, and of course, by extension, law enforcement, representing law enforcement throughout New York and the job that they do. Many of you know my background's in law enforcement. I was a New York State trooper, and I was the sheriff of Erie County. You may not know, my father was a state trooper, my brother was a state trooper, and my uncle was a state trooper. I come from a law enforcement family, and I am very, very proud of it. I'm even prouder in these times to have men and women in law enforcement, like those represented here today, continue to stand up and defend their communities, to continue to stand up and do their best to protect their communities in the face of what we've seen. Professionally, in the job I do now professionally as a criminal justice professional, also with a master's degree in criminal justice, and as a citizen, I am dismayed and disheartened by what I've seen in the last year and a half. The last year and a half, as Senator Ort has mentioned, what we have seen is a complete reversal of what we're supposed to be seeing. We have seen the enactment of law after law after law that has favored offenders over law-abiding citizens, over law-abiding New Yorkers, and over our communities. And now what we've seen in the past several weeks, even beyond that, is the attacks on law enforcement, the unwarranted, unprovoked attacks on law enforcement. It should matter to everybody, not just the police officer, but everybody in every single community. We look across the state and we see the violent criminals that have been let out because of so-called bail reform. We've seen an offender, a repeated felon, say publicly, how could they release somebody like me? What were they thinking? And we see it time and time again in every single community. We've seen people cheering the release of cop killers. We look during this pandemic and we see the looters and the rioters arrested, like they should be arrested for that, only to be set free to go and do more harm. A 1-year-old baby dead, shot in the midst of all of this violence, and the attacks on police still continue. The bloodied faces of law enforcement. Senator Jordan mentioned New York Police Department's highest-ranking uniform official attacked while trying to protect the community. It's outrageous. It is completely outrageous. So not only do we have to reverse this whole sentiment, the things coming out of this state capitol where they're favoring offenders over law-abiding citizens, we have to stop the attacks on law enforcement. New York State Police, or the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, many years ago instituted an accreditation program, and what that is it's a compilation of all of the best practices and policies that if a police agency meets, they get this great certificate to hang on their wall. But what it really says to their community is they have met the highest of standards as it deals with use of force, as it deals with pursuit policy, as it deals with the implementation of many, many different things, and training, and professionalism, and hiring, and accountability. In the majority of police agencies in the state, the majority of sheriff's offices in the state are accredited. New York State has said they've met the highest standards. And for the lawmakers and the governor to ignore the fact that this pursuit of professionalism by law enforcement in New York State has been a continuous process. The professionals represented here today dedicated their lives to enhancing that professionalism as they protect their communities. It's just disgraceful. So, we're starting this today with the package that the state sheriffs have worked hard at putting together and recommending and working hand in hand with our conference to better protect our law enforcement officers across the state. And why does it matter? Not just to protect them, but to protect all of us and to protect all of our communities. Because if they are not safe, nobody can be safe. And that's part of the training process. So police officers are trained in pursuit driving. They're trained how to use their lights and siren. But the admonishment is, do it safely. You can't be reckless, because if you can't get there safely, you can't help anybody. Well, the same holds true for lawmakers. If we're not protecting our law enforcers, and if we're not working to keep them safe, they can't keep all of us safe. And look at what's taken place the last year. Crime up across the state, violent crime up across the state, not good for any of us. And we're standing with our law enforcement officers and agencies across the state today to say it must stop and we must reverse this course. Thank you.
Well said, Senator Gallivan. And you made me think, when you plant a lemon tree, you're going to get lemons. When you pass the laws that we have passed the last 2 years, this is what you're going to get. This is not an accident. This is not a byproduct. These are all things that this conference and the people who opposed, my colleagues, these laws said would happen, and now they're happening. So understand, this is what you get when you talk about the police being part of the problem. When you attack this gentleman here, when you attack the people behind me, you're attacking New Yorkers. You're not just attacking a cop, you're attacking New Yorkers. You're attacking that community. You're attacking the foundation that protects our democracy and our freedoms. Plain and simple. And with that, I do want to call up another colleague of mine, certainly no stranger to defending and speaking up for law enforcement in his own community of Rochester in Monroe County, a friend of mine, Senator Joe Robach.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank Senator Ort, our leader Ort, and all my colleagues. This one to me is so important, not only as someone who has the honor and privilege of representing my community in the state Senate, but as a father, a community activist, someone who's put time in to try and make so many communities where I represent safer. I feel this is so important. And I'll just get to it, because many of the important things have been said. Look, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're in the legislature, with the same fervor we changed policy when inappropriate action was done by someone in law enforcement, a very isolated case, we should also address protecting with the same amount of passion and importance those men and women every day that throughout the state go out, do their job professionally, follow the rules, and legitimately not only try to help people and do it in the best way fashion and really become that thin blue line between us and chaos. And I would agree, we are getting to a critical point now where people are so brazen, they're openly attacking police. Let me give you the statistics. We talked about every death is important, all life is critical. We've had, in the first 6 months approximately this year, 135 men and women in the police department who have given their life. 31 targeted by gunshot, aggressively going after police for doing their job and being that buffer for us. Nothing could be more outrageous. When I looked at the package of bills that we put forward to try and stop physical attack, assaults, targeting of policemen and women, I already thought they were the law. We should not only be doing this, this should be a given and a granted. And again, there is no one can make a logical argument that they don't need the police. Ironically, in Rochester this weekend, we had people block 490 as part of their protest, even though they didn't have their permit for that. When other people who had a permit to be there kind of clashed and had words, maybe a little bit more, ironically, the same people that were there to protest getting rid of the police department or kind of against them wanted to know why the police were calling on them to not arresting the other people that didn't have their opinion. That to me just says it all. But forget about voicing your opinion. These are the people that protect us when someone's in your home, when you're on the street being robbed. And unfortunately, it goes on. There is nobody that wants slower reaction time, less police that I know. So I'm not only talking for myself and with my Republican colleagues here, but I want to tell you, and this may be the most important thing, I've heard from countless people of every demographic in my community, which is very diverse, that they want the police. They want to feel protected. They don't want to feel like they're more vulnerable to any crime. And that's why everybody of every party should be doing this bill. We should not be defunding the police. We should be defending the police because they defend us. And at the cornerstone of any democracy, any neighborhood, any community is public safety. Let's do the right thing. Let's put the politics and the rhetoric aside. Let's pass this package of bills or something similar. The public expects it, demands it, and needs it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Robach. And certainly last but not least, I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody, is Senator Akshar, who is also a former member of law enforcement. He also knows firsthand what it's like to be out there defending our communities, and he's certainly been a great voice for law enforcement long before we reached this current precipice or we got into this current debate. He was always a strong voice for law enforcement, and I know somebody who, he may not wear the uniform anymore, but he's still, in his heart, the oath he took, he still lives by that every day. So Senator Akshar.
Leader, thank you very much. Undersheriff, if you're waiting for an invitation, my guess is that you'll never get it from the second floor to be heard.
I'm available now.
Leader, thank you for bringing that point about my time in law enforcement. Like Senator Gallivan, it was some of the best time that I ever spent professionally. I was a proud member of law enforcement, but I am equally as proud to be a member of this conference. Under your leadership, we continue to be a conference of principles. We continue to be a conference that does not make decisions based on how the political winds are blowing or how loud the advocates are out on the street. This conference has always stood at the side of the members of law enforcement because they deserve our unwavering support, and I'm glad that once again we are unapologetically out front on this particular issue. And let's remember that the men and women who wear the uniform, underneath that uniform, they are real people. They are people who care about their communities. They are people who have families. These men and women don't care about what your politics are. They don't care about the color of your skin. They don't care about what neighborhood you live in. What they care about is keeping communities safe. They care about being able to go home to their families after their tour of duty. Here's what's happening to millions of New Yorkers across this great state. Every night, they lay down, they fall asleep, and they have this terrible recurring nightmare. It's a nightmare where they are a victim of a crime, they have their car stolen, they're assaulted, they witnessed a violent crime, God forbid they were shot. They wake up the next day, they go on about their day, they take their children to school, they go to work, and then they very quickly realize that it wasn't a nightmare at all. It was in fact the new reality of New York. This reality has been brought to New Yorkers compliments of the spineless bureaucrats, the spineless Democrats that occupy this very building and occupy New York City Hall. Those same spineless bureaucrats continue to put criminals before members of law enforcement, and they continue to put criminals before law-abiding citizens. I see daily briefings with elaborate set pieces, the papier-mâché mountain that memorializes the infection rate. And the infection rate is, in fact, important. What I haven't seen is anyone memorializing the violent spike in crime. Now, this here is not a big budget, taxpayer-funded papier-mâché sculpture or an artist-commissioned poster, but it does in fact represent the curve of shootings that has exploded this year in the city of New York because of the reckless and irresponsible actions of the Democrat-led one-party rule. These spineless bureaucrats have walked away from law-abiding citizens of this state, and they've walked away from the men and women who put their health, their safety, and their lives on the line every single day for the very same people in their communities. These are the people who go into darkness and confront evil on our behalf when those very same bureaucrats sleep peacefully at night, and then they turn their back on law enforcement when they wake up during the day. Anyone surprised at the staggering spike in violent crime? Is anyone surprised by the staggering spike in assaults on members of law enforcement? This kind of lawlessness that we're seeing across this state, in every corner of this great state, it's what happens when you have failed leadership. And I'm going to say this unabashedly. The blood that's been spilled on the streets of New York, that is on the hands of the failed leadership of one-party rule in this state. So every day we watch as more New Yorkers needlessly lose their lives, and hardworking police officers are vilified and they're abandoned by our leaders and physically attacked by criminals out on the street with no consequence. But today, leader, I want cops, the thousands of men and women who put the uniform on every single day across this great state, to know despite what's happening in City Hall, despite what is happening in this State House, there are in fact people who care about you. And those people are right here in the Republican Conference of the New York State Senate. So unless one-party rule wakes up from this nightmare that they themselves have created, the voters will surely deliver a message, a wake-up call, that one-party rule deserves on Election Day. My position, not only today but every day, is that I unapologetically and unabashedly support the men and women of law enforcement. And the only thing we should defund in this state, leader, we should defund one-party rule. Thank you.
I'll get you a little chart back to you.
No, I just want my mask because somebody will complain about that if I don't put it back on.
There you go.
There you go, leader. Thanks.
I do want to thank Senator Akshar. You could tell he's obviously very passionate about this, and rightfully so, as all of our colleagues are. As they were talking, I want to end with this. You know, over my time here in Albany, my conference has often said New York has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. The Democrats in the state Senate haven't cut anything ever in my 6 years. The first time they say we're going to cut something, it's public safety. That's the first one. That's one. Number two, when I think about all the things that we have worked on or you've heard about, domestic violence, right? We've worked to end and the scourge of domestic violence. Who do you think responds when there's a domestic violence call? The lawmakers? The senators? No, it's the men and women behind me. I served for 2 years, along with Senator Akshar and maybe some others, on the opioid and heroin task force. And we spent millions of dollars trying to end the scourge of addiction and heroin and fentanyl deaths. Who do you think responds when there's an overdose and someone's dead on the floor of an apartment from opioids or heroin? The lawmakers? The social worker? No, it's the men and women behind me. So it's completely impossible to reconcile that we're talking about domestic violence and we're talking about drug addiction, and yet we also want to completely eliminate or undercut or undermine the very people who are on the front lines. When I was mental health chair, we put aside funding for mental health training teams, CIT teams, to provide mental health awareness and training for members of law enforcement, because we know that folks who are having a mental health crisis are far more likely to come into contact with a police officer than they are a mental health professional. That's a fact. So all these things that you're hearing about, we've been doing them. This conference, when we were in the majority, and I know today, supports funding social workers, mental health funding. We support those things, but not at the expense of public safety and the men and women who are on the front lines of all those issues. So with that, certainly happy to take any questions either from me or from my colleagues.